The old guard in the top ranks and women excluded. The Taliban's interim government is criticized for falling short of the group's promises of change. So can it win approval through action? And will it get the support it needs to tackle Afghanistan's crisis? This is Inside Story. Hello, welcome to the program. I'm Hashim Ahalbarra. The Taliban promised an inclusive government that represents women, but after weeks of anticipation, its interim government appears to lack just that. It was an all-male caretaker cabinet consisting mainly of the group's members who had close ties to its late founder, Mullah Omar, as well as members of the Haqqani network that's labeled a terrorist organization by the US. The selection didn't include representatives of Afghanistan's toppled government, and it failed to meet the demands of the international community. Foreign governments and lenders mainly want to see the rights of women and ethnic minorities respected. The Taliban needs their support to secure desperately needed aid and run government institutions. The group says other posts still need to be filled and a permanent leadership would be named soon.
Thank God our country regained its freedom from occupation. All the causes of the wars were destroyed. Our compatriots enjoyed wide security, and for the first time the ground was prepared for the coming of a strong Islamic government. Our country needs comprehensive activities and services in various fields to address the legal, economic and social rights of the people and prevent losses. All government agencies have not been announced yet. Some ministry posts, directors and the deputies remain vacant. Efforts are underway to fill them. Efforts are also being made to bring people from different regions and across the country to play a role in it.
Charles Trafford has more on the reaction from Afghans.
We've been speaking to people on the streets of Kabul for their reaction to the announcement of this interim Taliban administration. And by and large, it's fair to say that the majority of them, whether they oppose the Taliban or support them, are expressing a great sense of relief. There is a sense that finally there is potentially the opportunity, despite the pressures on this country and on this administration, to prove that they're going to stick to their promises and protect human rights. Potentially people are saying, well, now we can start again. Most importantly for them is security and getting food on the table for their families. Interestingly, we've been speaking to a number of women as well, and we know that there are no women have been given portfolios in this administration. The women that we spoke to said that it is vital that women are given the opportunity to stand in this government and certainly in any future permanent government, because they say that women are going to best articulate their political needs within Afghan society. We understand that there is great support in the south of the country, in Helmand province, around the city of Kandahar, for example, because of course that is the birthplace, if you like, of the Taliban. But there are some very real needs that need to be addressed here, of course. The humanitarian situation here is, in the words of the UN, close to being catastrophic. Around 18 million people needing humanitarian assistance every day. That's almost half the population. And we know that that humanitarian aid and Afghan assets is being held up in Western banks, for example, because in the eyes of the international community, the Taliban have to prove themselves before those kind of funds are even begun to be released. The situation here in the capital is calm. And all eyes now on this administration as to whether it will stick to its words and rebuild this country. Charles Trafford for Inside Story in Kabul.
World powers have given a mixed reaction to the makeup of Afghanistan's interim government. The US expressed concerns about the affiliations and track records of some of cabinet members. Some senior figures are on the US and other so-called terrorism watch lists. The European Union says the government is not inclusive and representative. China sounded similar warnings but said it will maintain communication with the new leadership. Let's take a look at the challenges facing the Taliban as it appears to rule the country of 38 million people. Firstly, the group inherits a nation struggling with drought and unrelenting poverty. The state's coffers are empty and overseas funds frozen. It also needs more than $600 million in emergency aid. Basic services like electricity are under threat, and the United Nations has warned that food aid will run out by the end of the month. The Taliban is also grappling with protests against its rule, with Afghans demanding respect for civil liberties. Women are calling for greater representation in the new government. Let's bring in our guests in Kabul, Lutfullah Lutf, researcher and political analyst. Iram Ibrahimi is assistant professor of law at the American University of Afghanistan. In Brussels, Peter Knope is former head of mission to Afghanistan at the Dutch Ministry of Foreign Affairs. Welcome to the program. Lutfullah, people were waiting to see the Taliban deliver on the most important promise they made when they took over the country, which is basically reaching out to all the Afghans and form a national unity government. That didn't happen. Why, do you think?
Well, are now speaking from the position of strength. Yesterday, their spokesperson, Zabihullah Mujahid, made it explicitly clear that we will not accept any dictations from the rest of the world. And now we have fought our way to the power, and now it is our turn to call the shots, and they have called. And there are also other reasons for them. I think they believe that they can run this country from a unilateral perspective, and the reality is also that the terms exclusivity have also become so ubiquitous, almost to the point of cliche in the last 2 decades of the Afghan political arena. If you see the two terms of the former President Hamid Karzai, they were the most exclusive governments, but what we got from them were more internal factions and internal political divisions.
Okay.
And then if you see the two terms from President Ghani, the same happened. So now Taliban say that what the West say, what the other countries said, it doesn't matter to us. And now we know better how to form the government and who to include, who not. But they also, I think, the issue of inclusivity to a certain extent by appointing 2 of the appointees from other ethnicities.
Yeah, but then people are still concerned about what's happening. Harun, do you think it's just because they consider themselves to be the victors with the upper hand in Afghanistan, and therefore they have the ultimate right to decide who should come to power and who should be represented in the government? But how can you win the hearts and minds of the others if you are going that path?
I think Taliban actually appreciate the cost that this move, what it's going to cost them in terms of governance. I think they appreciate that. And that's why I think the rhetoric so far has been that we will form an inclusive government. If they did not think they needed to form an inclusive government, at least needed to appear to be forming an inclusive government, then why go on with that narrative and rhetoric? But what they did contradicted those statements. And why they made that decision they made, I think it was mostly about maintaining internal cohesion. I think if they had brought in someone else, someone other than the current power holders in the movement, they would have risked internal fractions. So I think they chose maintaining internal cohesion over creating a workable government, actually the performance of the government, and gaining broader domestic and international legitimacy.
Okay, so if the internal cohesion comes first, and let me go to Peter. There's been a growing sense of optimism that at least people like Abdullah would be able to build bridges with the Tajiks and have them on board, that Hamid Karzai would reach out to different factions, that the Hazaras would be on board, and therefore you might be able to come out to the international community and say, we have a government that stands for Afghanistan. Where does this now leaves the country and the Taliban?
Well, it's very old school, isn't it? It's as if they start and go back where they left off 20 years ago, as if nothing has changed, as if they have no further developments and they haven't considered, what happened in the last 20 years. So it's as if they go back as if nothing happened. But obviously things have happened, and the internal cohesion is obviously something that concerns them. There's different factions and fractions, but they brought back the old guys from those years in the late 90s, which is indicative for the internal divisions and the internal power struggles that are happening in the Taliban. So I agree with those who said, that we're seeing a Taliban that chose to rather keep the internal struggles under control than to get the country going.
People will closely monitoring whether the Taliban will have a Shia Hazara in this government that would send reassuring messages to neighboring countries like Iran. That also didn't happen. Do you think that this is something that could further strain relations with Iran?
No, I'm not concerned about Iran. Iran really wants security, safety in the country, and the discipline. The Taliban have shown 20 years ago that when it comes to discipline and security, they're not bad at it. So they could look after the security and the reduction of poppy culture, opium production, which is something that the Iranians are very concerned about. So I'm not so worried about the Iranian issues. I'm more worried about the financial flows and the potential for the influx of humanitarian assistance because of the composition of the present government, the new government.
Let's look at some of the lineups of this government, this interim government. Harun, the Prime Minister Mullah Hassan Ahund as Prime Minister. Did it come as a major surprise for the Afghan people who were looking forward to see someone like Mullah Brother, for example?
I think given the reports that were coming out and given that the Taliban made the choice to make Mullah Brother the face of the movement, there was a lot of expectations, even reports that Mullah Brother would head the government. But this person, the new person, is a senior member in the Taliban movement. He was close, as close to Mullah Omar as Mullah Brother was. He was the head of the leadership council of the committee. So he's not like an unknown or relatively powerless person. He is a person who would qualify if the criteria are who's the senior member in the Taliban movement. He would meet that qualification. I think the fact that someone else was favored and then last minute this name was announced just speaks to the internal struggle that existed inside the group. And I think that explains a lot why other people could not have brought in, because I think there was not, the group could not have withstand expanding its bases, because it would have alienated the people it needed to satisfy to keep the internal cohesion of
Lutfullah, people were waiting to see whether the Taliban is rebranding itself, is changing, is bringing more reformists into the group. But with Mullah Hassan Ahund, there's this prevailing sentiment that the traditional shura councils, the religious establishment within the Taliban is prevailing, is the one who has the last say.
Yeah. Generally speaking, I think for an organization to fight for more than 2 decades against the Western forces in Afghanistan, and who have traditionally held up to the strict code of Sharia law, I think the West need to tame their expectations from them, that they will not change in the matters of months and even years. Now that they are observing they say that we will observe them and we will judge the Taliban based on their actions, not based on their words. And for that to happen, I think the international community need to give them the chance to settle down in the political in power corridors.
Yeah, but this is a problem. This is a problem. And let me go to Peter. you need cash to run the country. Winning a war is
Exactly.
something. Running a country is something different. You're looking forward to see the
Yes.
assets frozen in the US to be delivered to you. But then at the same time, you appoint someone like Sirajuddin Haqqani as a minister, and he's wanted by the FBI. Could this be conducive to a tougher US reaction?
But it's more than that. Yes, exactly. That is definitely going to be the case. But the other issue is that there's sanctions. People are there in the government that are they're listed on the sanctions regime. So dealing with these people in economic, financial, or monetary terms, or with that government is going to be sanctions. So the flow of humanitarian and development money into the country will be restricted because of the sanctions regime that is imposed on them by the United Nations and the Financial Action Task Force. So it will be very difficult to channel any humanitarian or development assistance into the country because of the composition of the government. Yes.
Harun, the hardliners are there, and they have the key positions in the government. People like Mullah Muhammad Yaqub Mujahid, son of the late leader of the group, Mullah Omar. Could it be an indication that we are likely to see him in the near future play more of a bigger role in the Taliban movement?
Taliban have been very good at keeping their internal discussions private. Obviously, Mullah Omar's son has a big name, and Mullah Omar still carries a lot of weight within the movement. But he's also rumored not to be the person who's actually running the military commission, which was basically their top military person in the movement. There were other major commanders whose name were often mentioned as the people who are actually running the military commission. So whether it was more of paying tribute or acknowledging Mullah Omar's the founder role in the movement, and then allowing the other military leaders in the group to actually be in charge, I really don't know, and there's very little evidence that you can actually use to answer those questions.
Okay.
I would like to just add one point to the comments that was made earlier. I think Taliban have not been held accountable on anything by the international community yet. If you look at their actions, whenever they were told that they have to do something, and they chose not to do it, they didn't face consequences. Mm-hmm. So I think they are following the strategy that has worked so far. Basically, do what you need to do, and the world is just going to go along with it.
Okay.
Now that they are the government, it's going to be much more complex. But I think if you were as leadership of Taliban, you would have not a lot of reasons to worry about doing what you need to do to satisfy your base.
Lutfullah, right after the government was announced, Mullah Haybatullah Akhundzada asked the ministers to uphold Sharia, and widely interpreted as a message by the leader of the movement, to the people, to stick to the ideal of the Islamic Emirates of Afghanistan. Is he trying to say to people that you have to forget about any reform in the near future, and that Afghanistan today will definitely look like Afghanistan back in the 90s?
Well, Afghanistan will definitely not go back to the 90s. Yesterday, one of the Taliban's key leaders, Mullah Wasir, declared it to the media that Afghanistan is now officially again the Islamic Emirate of Afghanistan. But most of the leadership who were in Qatar since the last few years, I think they have changed a lot, and they have seen the other sides of the world as well, which is totally different to the context of Afghanistan. So I don't think that would connotate as the Afghanistan returning to the 90s. And I also believe that this time they will show some relaxation and flexibility in the reforms will be one of the agenda of them.
We have some few other angles to cover. Let me go to Peter. When the ministers will go to their offices, they will have to grapple with the harsh reality, which is basically you have people to feed, you have hospitals to look after, and you have to deal with an economy which is about to collapse. Do you think that the international community ultimately will decide to be more realistic about Afghanistan and say, let's send some cash to the Afghan government?
Well, here, opposing reflexes will meet somehow, and I don't know how we're going to solve this, because the sanctions regime are very clear. The sanctions regime is easy in the sense that anybody who works through or with somebody who is listed on a sanctions list in the United Nations or nationally in the US will be punished in terms of financial flows. So you will be blocked, debanked, and blocked from financial transactions immediately. So it means that the humanitarians and other actors cannot work with the present government in Afghanistan. And at the same time, people will want to help. There's humanitarian needs to be fulfilled. Now, how you're going to deal with those opposing or conflicting elements is to be seen, but it's not going to be easy, because the United States and the UN will do everything to do it according to the book. And the book says you cannot work financially, economically with people that are listed.
Well, that's the problem also, but I think this is going to be a delicate thing also for the Americans and the Europeans. Harun, foreign aid represents something like 75% of the public spending of Afghanistan. If the Americans and the Europeans decide tomorrow not to send money to the Afghan government, the risk is there that the Taliban would go to the Chinese and the Russians and say, listen, we'll give you more presence and influence in Afghanistan in exchange for cash.
So I think that is actually a false premise. First of all, there are two issues. One is aid. Literally sending food and medicine so people wouldn't die. I think there's going to be a lot of pressure on the international community to actually, despite the Taliban government, to send aid. It's going to become more difficult, but I think it's going to happen. The other issue is what Afghanistan needs to actually have an economy, have a functioning economy. Those are major investments. I mean, the US was paying for the roads that were built in Afghanistan. It was paying for the hospital that was built in Afghanistan. 500,000 Afghan, almost 400,000 people, were the civilian employee of the government that were receiving their salaries indirectly from the foreign funds. 300 people, many of them ghosts, but still 300,000 salaries were being paid to the security sector. Now, will China fill in that gap? The answer is simply no. If you look at what China does, for example, in Africa, they provide interest-bearing loans. Taliban ideologically cannot accept interest.
Okay.
Second of all, China is mostly interested in extracting resources. When they even invest in infrastructure, they build roads and they build ports that will help them actually extract resources. That's not what Afghanistan needs at this moment. It is very unlikely that China would commit that much resource to build dams in Afghanistan that have no direct relation with extracting resources.
Okay.
And just finally, look at just Iran. Iran is sanctioned by the United States. How much business China is doing with Iran, given that Iran is much bigger prize in Afghanistan by any measure?
Let me go to Lutfullah. Lutfullah, this is going to be my last question to you. The Afghans have tried the Taliban from 96 to 90 to 2001. And then they've tried the establishment that came after for almost 2 decades, which people said was completely disconnected from reality and responsible for the embezzlement of public funds. Do you think that the Afghans this time would like to give the Taliban a second chance? Briefly, if you don't mind.
Yeah, given the last 2 decades of the so-called democratic government in Afghanistan, I think they are not happy with that. And there is a fatigue all over the country. The Afghan people can compromise on the track record of the Taliban, and they certainly would like to give them the chance. But the Taliban have to keep in mind the fact that this society has changed a lot. Now they have different expectations and different demand, and they need services, public services from any forthcoming government, be it the Taliban or anybody else. So they definitely can give them the chance because they have no other way in war that have gone on for years in Afghanistan. The Afghan people want an end to that. And therefore, I think the Taliban now, they are in power nonetheless. So they want the Taliban, and they will hold the Taliban accountable. Don't forget that, the people now, the constitutions we have seen, this is the indication that what is in the fold for the Taliban in the future. So they need to realize the the reality of this society and then act accordingly.
Thank you, Lutfullah, Lutf, Harun Rahimi, and Peter Knopi. I really appreciate your insight. And thank you too for watching. You can see the program again anytime by visiting our website, aljazeera.com, for further discussion. Go to our Facebook page, that's facebook.com/AJ Inside Story. You can also join the conversation on Twitter. Our handle is @AJ Inside Story. For me, Hashim Ahalbarra, and the entire team here in Doha. Bye for now.